Hi, welcome to the Student Spotlight. On this episode, I am joined by a very, very special guest and someone who actually helped me begin my journey in computer science, which is amazing to be able to pinpoint that to a specific moment. But today I am joined by Alexander, or Sasha, as we like to call him, Skvortsov. He's a second-year computer science and math major at Pennsylvania State University, and he first started programming through the International Youth Neuroscience Association, a nonprofit that actually helps high school students explore their interests in neuroscience early on. Sasha is currently working on Flareum, a free open source forum software, and outside of programming, he enjoys pottery, cooking, and listening to music. This episode has to be one of my favorites, and it's a great start to the new year because we reflect on our beginnings as two computer science students, as well as explore the future of what young adulthood could entail and questions like integrity and personality. So I'm really excited for this episode, and I hope you are too, and I hope you enjoy it. We'll see you next time, and Happy New Year. Well, welcome, Alex or Sasha. Wait, why do you, okay, hold up for a second. So, like, Russian people have, like, these nicknames, right? Or is...
Yes, Russian people are the only people in the world that have nicknames.
No, I mean, like, Sasha.
We came up with the concept, that's why they're called Nick, because Nick is such a Russian word.
No, I mean, like, I've noticed it's a thing. Like, people say, like, if someone's called Michael, I've heard their friends or something call him Misha or something like that. Is that true? Like, where does this come from? No?
I think just kind of in any other language is sort of a shorter form. It's, in a way, it's kind of a softer, more endearing phrasing.
Okay.
That makes sense. Kind of a friendlier tone. Now, as to the exact mechanics of getting Sasha from Alexander, I am baffled.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Still do not know, despite many attempts for someone to explain it to me, but, I just kind of roll with it, so.
Wait, so, like, there's, like, a dictionary and stuff, and, like, you just say, my name is Alex, so my nickname is Sasha?
It's not a dictionary. It's not like Vladimir Putin releases the annual reference of names. I don't know. You know a more fancy word for reference. Annual amalgamation of nickname translations.
Amalgamation, yeah, totally. That's how you use that word. Okay, wait,
Exactly.
like, it's just a nickname that, like, your family was like, okay, let's call him Sasha. There we go.
Pretty much.
Okay, fair enough. But I call you Alex, so I'm gonna just say Sasha, I guess, at this point. We will... Okay. That's enough we should talk about.
A podcast is what it took.
Yes.
After many years.
All right, so hello, Alex. Welcome to this episode. I just noticed this is going to be up on the new year. So we're like time traveling to the future. Do you have any goals for the new year, or do you not believe in resolutions and things?
Well, I'd prefer for 2021 to not be like 2020, but that's not really a goal. I guess it's most of the standard things, work out more, read more, be more responsible, have more fun, 2020 has been just sitting inside, and it's the responsible thing to do. But on the other hand, I'm hoping that things get better in 2021 so that we can all live.
But have you not liked 2020? I mean, besides pandemic, just like the whole living inside futuristic thing, how we're all going to end up in like pods or something, and then...
Well, I don't know if they're going to end up in pods necessarily.
Like sci-fi stuff.
I don't know to what extent this really qualifies as sci-fi. I mean, on the other hand, I think it is interesting that so much of this work from home stuff, for instance, could not have been possible 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, I mean, back then, like, I remember when all we had was Skype, and even that
Yikes.
Could not have sustained what we're seeing now. I think that there's a number of sort of trends we'll continue to see. Work from home for jobs that can support it is going to become more accessible. Another sort of theory I have is that offices in cities will become less of an obligation and more of a luxury for office workers because young people want to like myself want to go and live in the city where there's stuff going on, have fun.
Mhm.
People with families might prefer lower cost of living areas where there's better schools and other values, essentially. But overall, I don't think we're going to see that many changes in human tendencies to want to socialize, want to hang out. We're still
Yeah,
humans. Our biology
understandable.
isn't changing.
Yeah, of course. I just meant in the sense that we're in our own, like the only connection we have with other people is technically through technology. If you're being responsible and not partying. I see you people on Instagram partying. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I guess the main thing, or we have a lot to talk about today, but we can
Sure.
start from the beginning. This is a story. So how we met? How did we meet, Alex? Okay, this is bad transition.
How did we meet? Well, if I remember correctly, you were applying for, I think it was director of chapters for IYNA. Yeah, and I don't think you got that particular position, although if I remember correctly,
No.
didn't you get assistant director?
Yes, I did. I didn't get it. Yeah.
So
Also, that's the
kind of
International
similar.
Youth Neuroscience Association to our listeners.
Yes. Sorry for the lack of context there, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah, and then you just kind of got involved and were one of the most active and innovative members of the team. And yeah.
Okay. Yes. So for context, again, the International Youth Neuroscience Association was a nonprofit that Alex or Sasha started. And it's a neuroscience education sort of nonprofit. And why did you start it in the first place? Like, let us delve into that.
So this does need a bit more background because I don't think it's fair to say that I started it. I played a big role in it, but ultimately I co-founded it. This goes back to the Brain Bee. For those who might not know, the Brain Bee is a high school neuroscience competition founded by the one and only Dr. Norbert Myslinski. And it's been running for like 20 years now. But in high school, I competed in it because neuroscience was really interesting to me, and we can get more into that later. But in a way, I turned out lucky because Dr. Myslinski had this idea of a national network of neuroscience clubs that could help sort of connect people interested in neuroscience. And we kind of took that idea and ran with it. The first thing we did wasn't actually the clubs, was the journal, which has now published, I think, around 18 releases, or 24 releases, some very large numbers. So that's kind of crazy. But yeah, it all began in a basement of a Days Inn on, I think, the second day of the competition, where a group of high school students sat together and decided to conquer the world.
Wow, yo, that sounds interesting, but you said conquer the world, so that sounds like a New World Order kind of thing. But yeah, so that was pretty interesting from your end. And how old were you guys? Like, I know not to be ageist, but that's not something that you readily think of at that age, to just start a company or something, or an organization. Yeah.
I mean, most people were in high school. It's a competition for high schoolers, but at the end of the day, we decided to do it because we were interested in neuroscience, but there weren't too many opportunities for us to get involved. The Brain Bee was the best there was, and it's a great opportunity, don't get me wrong. But a lot of it was self-study. There was sort of a study book manual they provided, but beyond that.
So you were like, let's start something, which is a theme we will investigate throughout this episode. You don't find things. Alex is the type, or Sasha is the type of person to like find something, and he's like not satisfied. He wants more of something. So then he's like, you know what, I'm gonna just build it. So then brings other people, which is a nice trait. I will give that to you. But back to neuroscience, because that's kind of like our common denominator from the start, and then we will delve into what happened later.
Sure.
But why the brain, Sasha? Why the brain? I don't know why this is an interview all of a sudden, but that is, I don't know how I can go around that question.
It's kind of an unorthodox story, but I guess it just kind of comes from curiosity. I think back in middle school, I read it. I don't even remember what it was now. It wasn't even a particularly good book, but it was a sci-fi book about this world where like people could get brain implants that would get them to like, you could eat something healthy and it would taste like something unhealthy and more good tasting.
Pill? I'm pretty sure that's a pill.
I hope not.
I think
there is something actually. Yeah. It's like, Yeah, that's.
It's
But
like you
anyways,
eat
but like,
something. Mhm.
I was curious about the idea because, I mean, I had some sort of idea of how computers work because I've grown up in the 21st century, like I guess most listeners to this podcast probably. But I mean, how does that work? Is it just kind of like a program that you run, a run food.exe, or I mean, probably
Oh
not.
God. Okay.
So like, I mean, how would something like that work? Can something like that work? And that got me down the path of trying to figure out how sentences work, how the brain worked, how decision making worked. Not at sort of the level where I can stand up and say I fully understand the brain now, but
Because we
just to
don't.
understand who we are. Yeah, exactly,
Hmm.
exactly,
And then that started. Okay, yeah, that's a
pretty much.
pretty fair start. For me, I just realized, like, because we had this conversation yesterday, I was actually in my computer class, which is like kind of weird. The universe was like, yo, this is a teaser for what you might like in the future. But I was in a computer class building this game, and then I went on YouTube to play, like, I think it was like Lindsey Sterling or something, some violin music. And then I see a craniotomy recommendation. I was like, yo, this is cool. This is what we're made of. We're just made of 3-pound fat. And I was like, okay, cool. That was my start. So yeah. So we both liked this thing in our heads and wanted to explore it.
I
Okay.
think surgery videos and neurosurgery videos are I don't know to what extent this is the most common way to get into neuroscience, but I pretty much anyone I've talked to who's interested in neuroscience has watched some compilations.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
It's like
I mean, they
literally
do them without anesthetics too.
because
I
there's
mean,
no
I know you know,
pain.
but
You can't sense
yeah,
pain in your brain. Yeah. Yeah.
imagine
Well,
that.
like imagine, but like the thing that's so weird about it is if you cut like 1 centimeter of something, you can just make someone blind or you can just make
Centimeter.
someone deaf. Like whatever.
Centimeter is big. They're say take millimeter. Yeah, but
Wait, Americans use inches. Okay,
mm,
yeah.
inches are.
I guess 1 inch or something like that. I don't know. I was just making a
If you're cutting
reference.
an inch in the brain, that's gonna be bad.
I don't know, you Americans. But yeah, like the
Don't
idea
get
is
me
just,
started.
hmm?
Don't get me started on the
Yeah, your
imperial system.
well, Canada's not that great either, so you know what, it is what it is. Um, but so I have a. Do we want to talk about like the nonprofit situation?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Oh.
Should I just go on and talk about it then, or
Yeah. I just
okay?
thought I wasn't recording for a second.
No, good. I mean,
Mm.
there's a lot to talk about, I suppose. So it depends on which direction we want to take this. But essentially, the mission was to help people learn more about neuroscience, and that's what we set out to do. Our first and probably even biggest product to date was the IYNA journal,
Mm.
uh, and that's actually the most neuroscience I ever really did in the organization.
Mm.
Turns out that most of running an organization is management and business,
Business.
legal stuff. Yeah, not as much actual neuroscience, but we have a journal, and
Mm.
it usually turns up to be 40 to 50 pages of student-written work, which is honestly really, really impressive that so many people put in that much
Mm-hmm.
work and that much time, because I know how long it takes to write good research.
Mm-hmm.
So put it together, and then we have a whole editing process where they can get feedback. And the whole idea of that is to get people familiar with reading scientific literature, so
Mm-hmm.
that when they go off to college, when they go off to higher education, when they start to do their own research, they have a basis in doing that paper research outside the lab, and in writing up their ideas in a way that, I guess, in the scientifically correct way.
Yeah, because like the only time that you sort of write research articles is for school or like a bio
Yeah.
class. But in this opportunity, you can actually write something and it's in a journal that's student reviewed and everything, which is very cool.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I know that the articles that I wrote were useful, but I also know that the work I spent editing and reading helped me, first of all, to learn more because
Mm-hmm.
I read them, but second of all, to sort of better understand how to write in a scientific manner.
Right. And but so like back to the point of you saying neuroscience was like the kind of the only thing that you did with journal, the business side of running an organization, because you were always like at the top, which makes sense because you were one of the founding members of leading the organization. But when I got to the top and just like started managing things, I was like, yo, this is hard. I don't know how you did that. I think you're just more talented in managing people or just more like that is sort of no? Why are you
I
shaking your head?
I don't know that it really comes down to talent. I mean, I management and entrepreneurial leadership is one of those weird things where I think it's really difficult to learn theoretically.
Yeah,
It's just
that's the
one of the things
problem.
that the more you do it, the better you get at it. I mean, for example, I think that most business education, business classes, because they present kind of the simulated, simplified reality of what you're actually working with, I don't know how valuable it really is to learning. Um,
Hmm.
Most of my experience and my sort of growth as a leader and as a manager came just from coming head to head with problems. In the early days, we had our initial sort of founding board of 12 people, and we had many restructures. Usually what would happen is people would sign on but then not actually be interested in carrying it forward.
Hmm.
So then if essentially a group of people who are being active would split off into a sort of new governing body, and the old one would be phased out over time, sort of to make sure that we open up opportunities for new people to join as well.
Hmm.
But managing an organization, there's many aspects to it, right? Some of it is researchable. For example, I handled the 501c3 incorporation of the IYNA, and that's pretty all that you can read online. And it's just doing the
Hmm.
research and making sure that you don't mess up your tax documentation because that could be bad.
Yep. The IRS is at your door. Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, we never had them coming to my door, but yeah,
Scary.
no, it's better not to mess around with that stuff. Other things were more procedural. I'll give an example actually with the journal. In the very early days, there was one team that did everything, right? Simultaneously, we sort of had meetings to set the sort of direction for the organization. We ran what few chapters there were, if there even were any back in those days.
Hmm.
And we did the journal, as in we were the editors, and we assembled it and we put it up, and then we sent out emails saying, hey guys, another journal. Um,
I mean, that's the
and
common theme of like when you start an organization or startup, that's the hustle. You all have to do everything. So yeah.
Oh, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of extends to many other things where you have sort of technical startups where the person who starts it up tends to be, say, a programmer or a designer. But then if that person continues on
Yeah.
as the company grows, I mean, I doubt Mark Zuckerberg does a lot of coding these days.
Yeah.
But anyways, so coming back to the journal, we eventually managed to reorganize it, and now there's a team of editors, a team of assemblers, and everything works very smoothly.
Mm.
That transition actually is one of the most critical things because, as we just sort of discussed,
Yeah.
at a start, an organization is based on those founders. And the point where, say, a founder can leave or a significant personnel change could happen. I mean, the sort of proverbial name is the bus factor, right? If
Mm.
somebody were to be hit by a bus,
Oh, okay.
which hopefully doesn't
Free
happen. Um,
tuition.
oh my.
Like, yeah, exactly. Succession. You want to make sure that
But
you're
yeah,
not the only one keeping the company afloat. Yeah, 100%.
yeah, that's really, I think, the goal that founders should strive for.
Mm.
Unless that is, and I'm sure this is something that you'll have something to count about, unless they're trying to build
Mhm.
something which is based around the identity of the founder, right? You have Apple with Steve Jobs, and more recently you have Tesla and SpaceX with Elon Musk. And I know
Okay.
that you are quite the Musk fan. What's your take on? Oh, you used to be the Musk fan. What's your take on that sort of organizations that are based around the people, a person? Do you think that they can succeed in the long term?
So it's a personal brand, no? Like a
Sure.
personal.
Sure.
Uh, I mean, like everything in the universe, entropy is bound to come into play and this person will die. But if that's
It's
a
morbid.
business. Hmm?
It's morbid when going straight to death there.
What? Yeah, you have to. This is a business. This is business talk. So if your model is centered on a person and people are naturally unpredictable, like that is I mean, I don't know anything too much about business, but I don't think that's a secure model if you're just relying it on a person. Because any person can go, like you said, get hit by a bus or fall on their head, and then suddenly they're a totally different person than what happens to the company, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and Musk's pretty famous for his tweets and how that affects his stocks overnight and things. So, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's just people's desire to like see a big figure. Have you watched the Social Network movie?
Yes. Yes.
You don't know how many people I know who are in CS because they want to be Mark Zuckerberg. Like, I don't know if that is like this culture that we, maybe it's just more of a Western thing, because I know in Asian countries, especially Japan, like they value the collective. It's like a company, everyone values and sacrifices everything for the company. There's no like main figure that everything centers around. So maybe it's just a Western thing, but I think we have a tendency to idolize people and want to become like them and make it all about me, me, me. So I don't know how I feel about that. What about you? Like, would you want to have a company, I guess, that centers around your brand, whatever that means?
I've never really been one for that much of a personal brand. Haven't really been too active on the LinkedIns and the Instagrams. Uh, Nothing wrong with the platform and people who do use them, just not really my cup of tea, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of it comes from, and this is something that we see with all things actually. We live in this age of information, right? Where so much information is accessible so fast,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's social media, whether it's news apps and notifications, whether it's just searching stuff on the internet. And as a result, the things that people look at tend to be the most interesting things, right? Or the ones that are the most impressive. So that, as a result, means that when people go, say, on LinkedIn to look at their peers, they're not seeing what their peers are up to. They're seeing what the top 0.1% of their peers are up to.
Right.
Same thing goes with Instagram and lifestyle. Same thing goes with, I don't know, Twitter and whatever it is people do on Twitter, just, I don't know, expressing their thoughts, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But that sets the bar really high, but it also paints an incomplete picture because we
Mm-hmm.
only see the parts of these people that they chose to show us.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you say you want to be Mark Zuckerberg, by all means, fine. But you also have to acknowledge that Mark Zuckerberg is more than just his public persona as Facebook. Everyone is human. Everyone has worries. Everyone has doubts and sort of personal struggles, and everyone just has days where they wake up and don't want to get out of bed or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of
You
course.
know?
Hmm. That's a good point. I think that is something that we more so see with the tech community. I don't know why. Like, do you have any ideas why people want to just be a figure or something? Like, was this a thing in the olden days, or is this just because of social media and we see our peers doing great things and we're like, yo, maybe I should do this? I mean, like, this is a whole cesspool of just people wanting to be important because we all have existential dread and we don't want to just die and be another person on this planet that did nothing in the world. We just want to be famous people who make change and be remembered through others at the expense of overruling others.
I mean, I think there's many factors, and what you laid out is definitely one of them. Sort of the desire to leave a lasting legacy. I mean,
Yeah.
other factors, trying to somehow combat personal insecurities could be one. I think that sort of in this field there is a lot of expectation and growth. In computer science, salaries can go up really, really high. And that's partially because the work we do scales. Right? If
Yeah.
you're a doctor, you're doing really, really important work. You're saving lives. But you can only operate on one patient at a time. If you are a software engineer, you can build a website that goes out to 1 billion users.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 billion, I mean, that's an incomprehensibly large number of people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that scale, that level of impact, and overall a historical sort of culture of these figureheads that end up as role models.
Mm.
I think that's part of it. I think another part of it is sort of high school expectations,
Yeah.
and how we're brought up in childhood. And this is actually something that I'd like to talk about in
Mm.
relationship to the IYNA.
Yeah.
Um, did you feel during your high school times that there was sort of a necessity to outperform, to sort of come up with this new thing, if anything, just for the sake of getting into the next college or getting into the big company? Or
Okay, yeah, I love that you bring this up because I think this is more of an American thing, okay? Because universities, and I know like a lot of people want to go get into the Ivy League in the US, like just United
yeah.
States. So you all feel like you need to do something insane. You need to come up with the unicorn company to get into Harvard, and that is the goal. But I think as a Canadian, there wasn't that much pressure. Like universities here are pretty easy to get into. The thing I guess that's hard with our universities is that it's predicated on you get into the university, but it's hard for you to stay in. Like the dropout
Mhm.
rates will be higher, but it's easier to get into the university because Canada likes to have public universities. They want people to get educated, etc. But the standard is quite high, and it forces you to do that. So on a university level, um, kind of obligation, I don't think I was pressured to do something insane. I think it was just internally motivated to sort of see what I can come up with at a young age and see what that is. But I think there was also some influence from, I guess, my American peers, that I was like, oh, okay, like these guys are really into being a CEO or something at like 15 years old. Maybe I should look into this. But then I was like, yeah, no, I want to focus within and see what I like personally. Because I don't think, like, you know, that saying where it says if you get to something super easy, then it can
Mhm.
easily get taken away. I think having all those pressures and doing something extraordinary or something insane at a very young age at the expense of something like growth, because we're all young, we're trying to figure out ourselves. I think that in the long term is going to be more negative than positive, just for a single like line on a resume that gets you into Harvard. So, but so that like that's the I guess the negative side, but the positive side is it does encourage you or push you to look at ways to contribute to society early on, because I think that's what these universities look for. They want to look for change makers and things. Is that what you sort of felt? I mean, yeah, I'd be interested to see your perspective because you were into that whole thing, college apps.
I think it's an interesting journey. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that resume and sort of building a prestige wasn't a factor
Yeah, of
in
course.
deciding to do all this.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, and maybe I misinterpreted this, but it feels like over the course of the 4 years that I was in high school, there was somewhat of a big shift in this world of high school nonprofits.
Mm.
And actually, I'll actually preface by saying this. One, probably my least favorite part of the IYNA, or of all these organizations, is just the level of resume chasing and toxicity. Nowadays, you have, I mean, you looked on LinkedIn and you have
Insanity.
everyone's the CEO of something. There's so much resume
Yeah.
chasing, and it doesn't feel natural.
Mm.
And I can't say that I didn't play a role in that, and that is, I'd say,
It's
one of my
normal.
regrets from my time in the IYNA, that I should have tried to make things less competitive and less about me and more about the mission, I'd say. I don't think that I was that much of a sort of figurehead, but I think that I still could have done better in terms of, sort of making the culture better.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, what we have right now, there's a lot of it feels like it's just for the sake of having something. It doesn't feel like there is as much motivation to make an impact.
Mm.
And that idea, I started this, or at least earlier on, I began by saying sort of like we wanted to build an organization that would help people learn neuroscience, and conquer the world.
Hmm.
Right? And that conquer the world part is dangerous because it frames everything as a competition.
Yeah.
Right? I remember that there were times where there would be organizations that were doing competing things, but that idea of competition between nonprofits is a weird idea
Yeah.
because we're not really, we have the same mission. If we both
Yeah.
prosper and we both provide more opportunities, that's better for our mission, that's better for our target population.
Hmm.
But that's when ego gets in the way, and that really
Yeah.
messes a lot of things up, I think.
Yeah, I think you're totally right because I tend to be very competitive. Well, now I'm just like, yo, let's just be free spirits. If you want to do this, let's join. Like, who cares about labels? Who cares about who gets the 15% share of this company? Blah, blah, blah. Like, let's have a good intention and go with that. That's a key theme that I noticed because I'm reading this book. Do you know Mark Manson? He wrote
Yes,
the
yes.
Subtle Art of Not blah blah blah. He wrote another book that says it's like a book about hope, and he says that the transition from adolescence to adulthood is when you set aside your egotistical tendencies and things where you're looking for self-validation through attention from others, aka LinkedIn, but whatever. And you transfer them to virtue. So you operate on a virtue, on a moral compass of doing things not for the sake of other people looking at you in a certain way or being like, oh, this person is helping the world in this way. You don't care about that. You have to just focus on the mission itself and ignore the noise around it. So that's the fact that you had that realization, I think validates completely for your adolescent brain.
I
Do you
don't
know what I
know.
mean? Yeah.
I think it's complex because one thing is realizing it, the other thing is doing it. Like
Yeah.
that's one bit, because no matter how much we realize that, say, I mean, even if we realize that what we're doing is kind of productive, it's much more difficult to actually get rid of those egotistic tendencies.
Oh yeah.
And on another perspective, I'd say that in some contexts it might not even make sense to get rid of egotistic tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
I brought this up in the context of high school nonprofits because high school nonprofits are an interesting phenomenon where people can sort of show themselves to make a difference, and in most cases actually make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I want to clarify that I'm not trying to in any way rip on people who are trying to do good things.
Oh yeah, of course.
Uh, on the contrary, I want to sort of present this from the
Another side.
perspective of someone who's sort of gone through that process. Um, but anyways, with high school nonprofits, the mission is directly to make a positive impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some level of corporate mumbo jumbo, of some schemery might even be necessary to get the organization to a position where it can do things, but the primary nature of it cannot and should not be competitive.
Mm-hmm.
But take that in contrast with the startup, right? If you are trying to launch a startup and your goal is to launch a product that will make money and that will sort of provide things for consumers, that's going to be competitive, and it kind of has to be competitive. That's how
Yeah.
capitalism works.
Yep. Okay, fair enough. I think again, like the tricky thing with teenagers, that whole demographic, is that we're trying to figure out ourselves, show the world that we are worth something because university stuff. And then at the same time, like we have good intentions because we're fundamentally children at heart, and children are like, amazing
Yeah.
people. But it's just like we're this gray area of like in progress bar, and there's so many factors that can shape you in a way that's either corrupt or good intention, but you won't reap as many rewards, etc. So yeah, I that's a good angle. I didn't think of that before. I think that was always a thing that was running in the background, but something that you don't notice because it's kind of awkward to be like, y'all are just here for your resumes, but then I guess
But
that's
again, I
the
mean,
world.
I think it's dangerous to avoid that oversimplification,
Yeah.
right? And then going back to the idea of a progress bar, if you have reached a destination, that means that you've stopped growing. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though our brain is fully matured at 25,
Yeah.
that's not an excuse to stop learning, to stop growing, to stop trying to improve yourself. I don't think there's a terminal point you can reach where you are the best person you can be. And as
Unless
to
you're
sort of,
dead.
Well, yes.
That is the
I,
return
I,
statement.
I suppose it would be difficult to do stuff when you're dead. Although, of course, if you manage to sort of secure some resources and leave them behind to good causes,
Mm,
I guess that's sort of one last push in the right direction from
mm,
beyond the grave.
yeah.
Um, but actually, just that idea that you mentioned earlier about sort of going away from self-validation to virtues, I think
Mm,
that's an interesting point to talk about because on one hand, it makes a lot of sense, right? We want to be better people, whatever that
mm,
means.
right.
But on the other hand, it is undeniably somewhat of a human nature to want to compete, to want to have more, to want to,
Yep.
you know, because at the end of the day, we're still, I mean, our brains have not evolved physically to keep up with society. So
Mm.
we're just kind of, Windows 10 running on a Commodore 64. You're going to get some glitches from time to time.
Oh God. Okay. Yes.
But that brings me to kind of to the point of integrity, right?
Mm.
Integrity is a complicated phrase, and you hear it a lot. Academic integrity for us college students is probably the
Oh
most common
yes.
one.
Academic
Um,
offense. Don't get one.
yes,
Yeah.
don't cheat. But I think one of the most important things to do, or at least that I'm striving to do, is to define your own sense of personal integrity. And
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily have to match. I mean, it can derive from many things, from sort of, it can be empathy based, it can be based on your faith, it can be based on sort of some legal structure that have set in, but sort of, I
Right.
think it's important to sort of define your own set of values and what does integrity mean for you. I think it's a
Mm.
personal journey, and that's something that's overlooked a lot in favor of saying stick to these 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever rules.
Yeah.
But if you're following someone else's rules and you don't understand why they're your own, it's going to be difficult to follow
Mm. And I read, like, again in that book, it says there's
them.
three types of ideologies that we choose for ourselves, and we can have a combination. Or they call them religions, but like not spiritual religions. There's three types. There's
Sure.
ideological ones, political ones, and then spiritual, which is like your technical, people think of religion. But the political one is like some people just choose, if you're a liberal or something, or Republican or Democratic, you look to these parties to just decide everything for you, and like these things shape the way that you deal and handle with the world. And then the ideological one is, you just look at fundamental, just like, this is so abstract, but you look at what integrity is, what non-corruption is, and then you choose to navigate the life in that way. So depending on what ideology or religion, quote unquote, you choose for yourself, that's how you react with the world. And the easiest one is, wait, I think I messed this up. It's like the easiest one is either political or just basically going with the flow,
Mm-hmm.
sheep mentality, trends, TikTok, whatever. That kind of thing. That's the easiest thing because it's just people who are living and then they tell you what to do and you're following the trend. So I think that's the whole thing that you see people following. This is so abstract to talk about, but I think you kind of like, it's easy to be a sheep is what I'm saying. And
Of course.
the majority is the sheep, and that's what you see, and you have to consciously make an effort to not follow what the grand puppeteer, if you, this is Big Brother-esque, but what the grand puppeteer is trying to guide the sheeps to do. So it's hard to be your own individual and have your own values. That is the question.
I think that actually comes down to, I mean, not necessarily comes down, but taking a step back to sort of what we discussed about integrity and values.
Yeah.
We have a very limited amount of willpower that we can use, say, every day.
Yep.
It's like any other sort of, I don't know, muscle. It gets tired if you overwork it.
ATP.
Exactly. But like, the more decisions you have to make in a day, the harder it is to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to integrity and values and definitions of yourself, right? Going back to the idea of that, it's easier to follow rules when they're laid out,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's by politics, whether that's by faith, whether that's by, and I'm in no way digging on that because in a way, those institutions have been fundamental to a lot of our society,
Yep.
right? But I think it's important to try to have your own doctrine you can follow.
Mm-hmm.
Because if instead of just adhering to what, say, the Democratic or Republican Party is saying, if you choose the values that you really align with and you write them down and you have them somewhere formalized,
Mm-hmm.
you can follow them just as automatically as if you were following a faith or a
Yep.
political party, but that way they're still automated and you don't have to spend that willpower worrying about them.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it, I think, easier to stick to them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember where I heard this. It was on a podcast. I think it was with Annie Duke, who was a world champion poker player, but I don't recall exactly. But sort of the idea that if you want to stick to something, you need to kind of define yourself in terms of it. That if you want to sort of work out more, define yourself saying, I am someone who works out. This is a part of me. This is part of my identity. This is part of my values.
Mm-hmm.
Now, full disclaimer, that is something that it's hard to stick by and actually do.
Oh, yeah.
You have to, sticking to your values is the hard part. But I think that in the long run, that could be a way to do that.
Just life, bro. Yo, this is crazy. Oh, God. See, this is young adulthood transitioning, trying to find your place in the world. And then when things don't match your virtues, all goes to flames. But it's okay. That is the struggle of life. So software. You like software.
And I do like software. Do you like software?
Yes, I like software. But so how do you think this fits into your integrity, Alex? Because I'm gonna just say, there's a lot of big companies and stuff that do things that are not that ethical, but they're kind of ruling the world, so we have to, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Software is a tool, really. It's not inherently ethical or unethical. You can make a program that sort of, provides tools to volunteers, or that automates away bureaucracy and helps people achieve more. Or you can make a tool that sort of, runs sweatshop software. The former is going to make a positive impact. The latter is pretty bad.
Okay, that's fair.
I think that a lot of things are much more complicated than we make them out to be, right? And it's so easy to oversimplify things down into basic ideas, right?
Yeah.
To say, I don't know, Instagram paints an unrealistic portrait of life, and therefore it is bad.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it allows people to express themselves. It allows artists to share their art. It allows people to sort of stay connected and sort of share their life with others and to feel closer to other people.
Right.
You have Twitter, which is sort of, on one hand, it has a reputation of sort of things go crazy and there's a mob mentality or whatever. And this goes from either perspective, either political stance, but it's also a way for, again, people to share their ideas and actually be heard out in the world. When it comes to, I guess when you phrase sort of as big companies control thing, I assume you're partially talking about big tech.
Yeah.
It's complicated because on one hand, these companies have done a lot for us. Google Docs is an incredibly powerful tool.
Yep.
Right? Facebook has genuinely brought a lot of people together. Right? And with Apple iPhones, say what you will about their recent innovations, I still am not quite sure about removing that headphone jack.
No, I
or
agree with that.
or the rumors that they're going to be removing the port altogether in future versions. That's kind of suspicious to me. But
Interesting.
I mean, right now we walk around with more computing power in our pockets than
Yep.
spaceships had.
So I guess, yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Duality exists in the world. But what I want to, I guess, backtrack to, because I think I thought we talked about this, but we didn't. You self-taught yourself coding in the beginning, and now you're pursuing computer science at university. But do you want to sort of talk about how you got into this whole thing in the first place? Your
Uh,
story as a
as with a lot
software.
of things, it's kind of necessity driven, I'd
Mm-hmm.
say. Um, it all comes down to the fact that DIY needed a website. Because, I mean, you need a website if you're a nonprofit and you want to share what you're doing with the world and recruit people.
Mm-hmm.
So I made a basic HTML site. Actually, didn't quite make it. We had a guy who was running our software team before that. Although he he was active in the first sort of few months of the organization, but then he didn't have the time. So I started with that, and I sort of revamped it a bit, improved it. And when I was just starting out, it was all kind of matic to me, right? Because I don't know, I had learned about HTML in middle school, but that's not really sufficient
Mm-hmm.
in the current world. So I mean, I could see this. So I don't know, you have like the divs and stuff in the code, but then you had a bunch of JavaScript and random dollar signs, which I had no idea what it means. And
Yes.
essentially, most of my initial journey was just kind of poking it and seeing if that poke made it better or worse. If it made it better, I kept it. If it made it worse, I revoked it. And that continued for, I mean, I don't know, IYNA started in spring of my freshman year. I think I really got active on the website in in the start of my sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
That continued for maybe about a year and a half, right? With sort of continual iterations and improvements. And then one particularly active assistant director of chapters decided to point out that the website looks like crap.
Yeah, it's
That was
ugly.
fun.
It was brown and black blocks, bro. It's like Minecraft, but not Minecraft was better.
Oh yeah, Minecraft is definitely better. Minecraft is blocky, but that's an aesthetic, whereas this was just a jumbled mess because I did not know how to design web pages. But yeah,
Yeah.
I concurred with that assistant director of chapters. I wonder who that might be, and decided that maybe we shouldn't be presenting our organization as this dark, unorganized, poorly designed mess.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually what got me really interested in user interface, user experience. I wouldn't say it's primary focus, but people like to use things that are easy to use, that are fun to use, and that are intuitive to use.
Mm-hmm. And that are pretty.
Exactly. Just that design makes a huge difference from the user's perspective, especially with so many different sites out there.
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. But essentially, at that point, I decided that I might as well redesign the whole site. And while I'm doing that, I might as well rewrite it to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's important to think, because when people start up with web development, oftentimes it's just, hey, can I make a website that looks pretty?
Yeah.
And that's very important. But nowadays, with the sort of rise of software as a service, you have entire programs running on the cloud, accessible through your browser. It's kind of like a browser is a new operating system,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, for example, as a nonprofit organization with high school students, we relied on volunteers, right? And we had kind of a lot of turnover because people were busy and they didn't always have time to contribute. And that's one thing that sort of was a persistent challenge, but that's kind of just the nature of an organization.
Yeah.
Right. So we needed an infrastructure for putting the positions up, getting applications, reviewing them, getting people onboarded that didn't take a 3-hour Zoom call each time.
Mm-hmm.
So looked at some available options. Most of them were sort of corporate recruiting tools that were like, hey, you can set up an account with us and then we can post your job posting to Indeed and all the other job sites, which wasn't what we needed because it was
Yeah.
a volunteer organization. So I ended up coding our
So
own.
you built it.
Yeah. And that, I mean, the site's built in Django, which is a Python web framework. And that isn't something that I just kind of dove into poking around. I watched some YouTube tutorials, read through their documentation, looked at some guides. But at the end of the day, the best thing that you can do if you want to learn to code is to start coding.
Yes.
But that's kind of also not necessarily the answer, because at the same time, you have to know what to code.
Yeah.
In a sense, I was lucky because I had that necessity of building a site, and that's what let me discover my interest in computer science.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just out there looking, well, I mean, what options do you have? You could go sort of I'm going to build a to-do list. I think that's sort of the most classic one.
Yo, you're calling me out right now, bro.
Hey, I'm sure it was a very nice to-do list. But like, what I mean is that it's nice. The thing that's really cool about software is that you build something that actually sort of is useful to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong in projects that are designed exclusively to help you learn something, but they don't build up passion as much, I'd say.
Because it's like hard. And there's so many errors and things. And I know you stay up super late trying to fix errors and debug stuff. So if it's just I'm just gonna create a to-do list just cause, and there's no actual societal use or advantage, then you're like, it would make sense for your brain to give up at that moment because, path of least
Exactly.
resistance. But yeah, that's a very clever, I guess, motive for you to start your journey from there.
Yeah. And one thing we can get into later if you want is open source.
Yes.
I'd say that's actually where people should try to lean towards if they can, but I guess I'll give a bit of background on that. My open source involvement actually started with this program called Django to SAML IDP. No, Django SAML to IDP, doesn't matter. Essentially, SAML is this
authorization
kind
stuff.
of. OAuth is a different framework.
Oh, okay.
But the main idea is, the main idea is the same, to be honest. It's just a different protocol for doing it. Right, but like when you go to a website and you can click login with Google. SAML is the same idea, only that's if you go to your company's internal web page and it says login with, I don't know, your company's system.
Right.
And the IYNA website needed that because by then we were not one website, we were about 3 websites and about like 4 or 5 peripheral services that needed authentication. So we needed a system to do that. And it's kind of, to an extent, it's a complicated framework, although it's not that complex. But I looked online and I found that there was on GitHub a Django package that did that for you, essentially.
Nice.
And I was really excited, but then I realized that it didn't work. So that was fun. But the beauty of open source on GitHub is that, say someone creates something, say, I don't know, I need this very basic authentication thing, right? So I set up this repository, or in this case, find a repository, and make whatever fixes I need, and then contribute that back. And now those fixes are available to everyone. And then the next person comes along and they're like, well, I need this extra feature. For example, one feature that was discussed is a sort of intermediate loading screen where you could see which of your data was being shared with the site you were logging into. That's not something that we needed because our site was all internal. You were going between like 2 sites for the same organization.
Yep.
But if you're using this for a bigger network, that's a useful feature to have, especially with sort of some of the EU's privacy laws. And it just kind of builds up from there. People have needs, they add on what they need, and then that's available to everyone. At the same time, if there's many organizations and people using it, that's a vested interest in making sure that it stays accessible and alive. So big fan of open source.
I think, yeah, that's true. I guess my little exposure in open source, I don't, it's just like one pull request, but still, it is something. There was this, the finite state automaton diagrams that you have to draw.
Sure.
There's this guy who's like, I think it was his personal website. He can build a DFA on his thing or an FSM, and his thing didn't work on Mac OS. Like you couldn't delete a state. So I was like, I'm gonna go and put an issue, and I put the issue, and I was like, wait, this is JavaScript. I think all I have to do is add a key code for a for backspace on Mac OS. I was like, okay, let me go, and then I forked his repository, put that in. I was like, take this pull request. I fixed it. Yeah, that's nice, and people will get to use it now.
Yeah, it's like that the work that you made is out there having an impact.
Yes. So you're working with Flareum. Do you want to talk about what that is?
Sure. Most recently, I've gotten involved in this open source project called Flareum, and essentially we make forum software. But we're trying to make forum software that doesn't look like it's from the 90s, because if you go online, most forums look like they're from the 90s. I'll sort of,
we can link it down below as well if you want to join.
I got involved in the project through, surprisingly enough, DIY. My life has kind of been this chain of going from one to the other. Yeah. But essentially, we needed a forum, and I looked at some of the alternative options, and there was, I think, 4 that it was down to. We're a modern organization. We wanted a modern design, so all the old stuff was out of the question. And that brought us to, you had vanilla BB, you had Node BB, you had Discourse, and you had Flareum, right? And from then on, we narrowed it down to Discourse and Flareum, because just design-wise, I think they were the nicest, and they had some of the packages that we needed to integrate with. But neither of them had, surprisingly enough, actually, neither of them had an integration for that SAML system for logging in.
Okay.
Right? So eventually I realized that regardless of which one I chose, I would have to write that up. So we ended up going with Flareum because, in my opinion, it was nicer designed. It was much easier to manage. The Discourse admin dashboard is this enormous list of inputs, right? For 20,000 different settings.
Holy.
And that just felt like a lot. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure that there's cases in which it's very
20,
useful. Not 20,000, but but for our case, it was a bit too much. Flareum had a philosophy of keep it simple, and I like that, and we ended up going with it. And as I started working on it, and this is kind of the real beauty of open source, as I got involved with it, I realized that it had a really, really awesome community. With that extension that I mentioned with SAML, I didn't know what I was doing, and the documentation at the time was not that good. But there was an active community of people who were there to sort of help me get started, to point me towards examples of things, to answer questions about how stuff was written. And that kind of got me thinking. One of Flareum's biggest problems is that it's in beta. And it was in beta last year, and it was in beta 3 years ago, and it's been in beta for 5 years now. Which is a long time to be in beta.
How long should it normally be? Beta.
I don't know. It depends on what you define as normal.
Okay. Point is in progress work.
Yeah, taking a long time. And I kind of had the realization that, I like this project. It looks nice. I prefer it to the alternatives. And if its biggest problem is that it needs a bit more development, that's something that I can help out with. So I decided to get involved. I started by just looking for more or less easy, simple issues, personal gripes that I had with it that I thought could be improved, and started opening pull requests. And about 100 pull requests or so later, I'm now on a core development team.
Wow. What did the people at Flareum say? Were they like, oh, we have a new one?
I constantly get complaints about the number of notifications I cause.
That's good. That's good. It means you like what you're doing. That is always
I do
good.
like what I'm doing.
See, open source
It's
is, yeah? Go ahead.
it's
Stop drinking
an
water.
interesting balance where on one hand you have that impact that I talked about, right?
Mm-hmm.
The code that you write is actually used by people. In the case of Flareum, it powers thousands of communities with all in total, like millions of people have used Flareum at some
Wow.
point. Yeah, that's a lot of people to impact, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's actually one of the things that I, once again, find so cool, that you write a few lines of code and those few lines of code somehow make life better for quite a few people.
Literally
Right?
millions of people.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's kind of mission driven, right? It's not, I mean, Flareum's set up as a foundation, so there is no for-profit entity of it, but it's not a charity like the IYNA was. It's not like our, I mean, but it's still kind of mission-based
Mm-hmm.
and kind of community-based, right? We have a very, very awesome staff team. There's some very great people that have been
Wow.
mentors to me and helped me grow as a
Mm-hmm.
software engineer and as a team member. And overall, it's just a really great experience.
And would you say that they're all like passion-driven people? Because this is not a job, and
No,
it's quite technical. Like if you have free time, I don't know, unless you really like building software on your free time, like you wouldn't be doing that, right? So that is
it's a
just pure
hobby.
intention.
It's a
Yeah.
hobby. I don't get paid. Pretty much all of our team doesn't get paid. And it's just something that I enjoy contributing to in my free time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The knowledge is priceless. It's like the Pythagoreans, you know how they used to collect, they used to just get a bunch of people and they would build like a little building or something, and they would just go and just, because they all like triangles and they want to figure out what triangles can do, and they're just like, yeah, okay, we're gonna spend our life learning about triangles. That's like open source, people wanting to join together to build something they like. Yeah. Cool. Oh God, it's already been more than an hour, which is great. That's great. But the last thing I guess we could talk about is art, because you think, so you're like quite an artiste, but also you have interesting connections with software, because people think software is very technical, but it is also a creative
Art.
experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am a STEAM, not STEM person, right? Uh, I think that, and this is partially kind of this historical Cold War artifact that, like, the only things that contribute value to society are hard engineering and building tanks
Yeah.
for war, right? I mean, personally, I don't want to live in a world where everything comes down to war, but even within STEM, right? Mathematics. I'd say I'll focus on that one, but all of them can be interpreted in some way. Math is interesting because as students, we are taught this mathless math, if that makes sense, right? We're taught arithmetic. We're taught
Yep.
these are
Computation.
numbers. Yeah, computation. These are operations you can do. Here's how to do them fast. And the closest, at least in the US curriculum, that people get to actual mathematics is geometry class, where they're like,
Oh.
here is 20,000 axioms. Again, not actually 20,000, but here is a bunch of different axioms and theorems, postulates. Now go on and prove things. But the proofs that you make, it's this weird version of a proof where everything is so rigorous and
Discrete math.
formalized.
Yeah.
Not even necessarily. Discrete math is a wonderful thing, right? At the end of the day, math is about taking some concepts and just going with them. You start with some axioms. They pose the foundation for this sort of imaginary world, or in many cases, which models an actual world, but in many cases, just an imaginary world. But you start with some axioms, and every step you take from there has to follow from them. It's, I guess, the only real way to know something for sure is by mathematically proving it. But going back to the idea of art, because that's kind of what this all is,
Mm-hmm.
real math is an art, right? And this is something that I only recently really realized because I decided to do a math major,
Mm-hmm.
and I decided to take in major math classes. And for my computer science major, I had to take multivariable calculus and
Yep.
differential equations, right?
Linear algebra.
Linear
Yeah.
algebra, yeah. Um,
Oh,
and those are kind of even in college, still primarily computation based. But then I got into my in-major classes, right? I had discrete math. I had analysis. Last semester, I took graph theory, which I really, really enjoyed. And writing proofs, it's not just stating a sequence of transitions. It's, in a way, it's about explaining things.
Mm-hmm.
It's about writing. You sit down and you write your logic, right? You don't need to always throw down 20,000 unnecessary symbols. You can just
Simple over complex.
phrase it. Yeah.
Yeah.
A good proof is a piece of art. And the same thing applies to many things in engineering, right? And there's a lot of memes about sort of, one of my favorites is the fundamental theorem of engineering is that sine of x equals x. And the proof is that at 0, sine of x equals x.
God.
But a lot of engineering, once you get past sort of the fundamental study of the laws that govern it.
Yeah, the
It's about building
fundamentals.
things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's about building things and designing things is a creative process. Even if you don't approach from a UI UX perspective, even if it's purely in terms of the utilitarian, I don't know, engine design, when no one's actually looking at the engine, it's still an artistic process. And in software that applies especially because of how frequently software needs to change, right? I mean, I suppose once you have, and I'm not by any means a mechanical engineer, right? But I assume that, I mean, once you've built a bridge, you can, or, I don't know, improve it in some ways or another.
Yeah,
but
maintenance.
Yeah, in software, a code base is usually never truly finished. There will always be features to add. There will always be major refactors to do.
Yeah.
And again, if you have a bridge, you can't just redo the entire bridge. I mean, you can, but that requires the entire bridge to be shut down for a while. With software, you write it once, it's accessible everywhere, but then you can always make changes to it.
Yeah.
So the idea of how to design a code base, how to write clean code that'll be maintainable later, how to test it, it's artistic. It's a creative process. And going into sort of the actual arts, the same applies to most arts. For me, it's pottery. I'm a pottery guy. I don't know how I really got into it, but since I was young, I guess I like this idea that you can just take this lump of dirt and then make it into a vase or a bowl or a cup or a mug, something that is useful, but it actually looks really nice. And I have taken the chance to explore that when I can. In middle school, I went to some sort of this summer ceramics camp. In high school, I took classes at a local ceramics center, and now at Penn State, I mean, when we're on campus, of course, I try to be involved in our local community ceramics center, and I even taught some classes last semester, which was really fun.
That's so cool. You have like that, you've brought the art into the technical side of coding. Also, I read this article really briefly that said the way that your brain processes coding or just when you program is different. So it's not, it doesn't trigger the language center of your brain because you think programming language. And it also doesn't trigger necessarily the math or analytical side of your brain. It actually encompasses a totally different like set of key points of activity in your brain. It's like both sides of your frontal lobe. And I think it was a new article released in Nature, but it was completely different. Like they've never seen anything like that encompasses both sides of your lobes, your frontal lobes. Isn't that crazy? Amazing.
it's a really cool process.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, just like yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
That is the
kind of
base
lost for
case.
words, honestly.
That's the base case. I mean, we've talked a lot, so I think we came to some pretty good conclusions. I learned some things as well on my self-discovery journey. But yeah, other than that, I will link. So do you want to like link anything in the description? I will link Flareum so you can get more people who are interested in open source. I've actually 2 episodes ago, one of my friends' name is Arsala. He started a company called Gray Software, and they're all about open source. So they, I guess they're kind of like an incubator for a bunch of open source projects, because he used to work at Google and he noticed there was like, they're too exclusive. Like they're all like, oh, this is Google, 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 branding, everything, when the true sense of community was missed of potential around the world. So he kind of went past that and started cultivating open source networks all around the world. So if you're interested in that, that could also be something.
Sounds like a great project.
Yeah, I will link everything down below. Any last words, Sasha? That's pretty.
Any last words? Am I gonna walk the plank now?
Yeah, that sounded like it's quite aggressive there.
No, but honestly, I think it comes down to figuring out what you enjoy and then just doing it.
Okay.
It's so easy to spend time worrying and stressing about, am I doing the right thing? Am I properly allocating my time? Am I optimizing for whatever goal I want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And with all that optimization, oftentimes we just miss out on living life. I mean, I guess an example and thing I've realized is that over this pandemic, I've just been mostly stuck inside, and I have devolved to one hobby, and that had been programming, right? And it's great, but and I really enjoy it. Like, I mean, programming is a hobby to me, and that's kind of what's so awesome about it, that I can work in software engineering and I can do this thing that I really enjoy while also getting paid for it, which is kind of crazy. But it's important to try things. It's important to try to figure out what you enjoy, figure out which of those things can sort of earn an income that can sustain your desired lifestyle. Those are the careers. The rest can be hobbies, and do what you enjoy.
I think that is a great start, or I think that is a great ending. Oh God, okay. So thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the Student Spotlight. We here are joined by Sasha, aka Alex, and yeah, we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye everyone.